Back live with you tonight on In Focus. The Minister of International Relations and Cooperation has reiterated South Africa's stance that a peaceful resolution is needed in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Minister Naledi Pandor made the comments during a state visit by her Russian counterpart Sergey Lavrov as Pretoria and Moscow look to strengthen relations. Dr. Pandor says diplomacy is the solution to the near 12-month conflict between the East European neighbors. To help us dissect Minister Lavrov's state visit and Moscow's trust in South Africa's diplomatic strength, we are now joined by Africa-Asia Dialogue Senior Research Fellow and Director Thembisa Fakude. Good to have you with us. Good evening.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
Let's talk first and foremost about this visit in the context of the amount of trade, really, that we are doing with Russia. I believe it's quite small, I mean, compared to what we do, for example, with the other partners like the U.S. and so on and so forth. Part of the reason for that, I heard one analyst saying that it's because much of what we have in the country, Russia also has, except for oil, and that pretty much would be the reason why we do so little trade. What is your analysis?
Well, Russia is a military manufacturer powerhouse. They've got abundant energy resources, including gas and oil. But other than that, they're not a really manufacturing country that can export most of its product throughout the world. So we don't really depend on Russia for our everyday consumption of goods, that is consumer goods and other goods that we use for our industry, etc. But we have a very strong relationship with the Western countries that continue to provide us with essential goods that we use on a daily basis, whether it's within our offices, PCs, etc. So our relationship with the Western countries is much more, I wouldn't say strong, but much more, in Afrikaans they say belangrijk.
Yeah.
It's more essential than the Russians' economy when it comes to trade.
For years now, the focus for Russia has not been on Africa. But we are seeing recently what you would call a scramble for Africa. What drives that?
Well, Russia and China have these expansionist ideas of bringing African countries into BRICS. That's one. The other thing is Africa also has this vast deposits of natural resources that both these countries, particularly Russia and China, need for their economies. So they have to increase their charm offensive, particularly when it comes to countries like South Africa, who has a much more influence on many African countries. So coming to South Africa is key, because if you convince South Africa of any political positioning, South Africa is likely to influence the other countries' political position, particularly regarding Russia. But I think what came out clear for me today was the explanation, particularly by our own Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Naledi Pandor, regarding South Africa's position on Ukraine. And Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov also tried to explain why Russia went to Ukraine and that Russia was willing to negotiate. But also importantly for me was to see those protesters, even though one would have expected more, but there were protesters outside as well against the visit of Sergey Lavrov, accusing Russia of continuing to create mayhem in Ukraine, that wanton destruction of infrastructure, killing of women and children. And we continue seeing those pictures. And I think what Sergey Lavrov will try to do, given that there are more and more pictures on our television depicting precisely what Russia is doing in Ukraine, is to try and sway that changing public opinion in South Africa and in Africa, to try and justify why Russia went into war with Ukraine. And I'm not quite sure whether they will succeed in doing that in less than 48 hours.
Public opinion is one thing. The other challenge is that this visit, of course, comes ahead of another visit from the other trading partner in the U.S. who's also heading this way. Is that going to create some kind of tension and conflict?
I don't think so. I think you had these three big powers visiting Africa. Last week we had Qin Gang of China, the new foreign minister of China, visiting certain African countries. He didn't come to South Africa. But you know that the Secretary of Treasury of the United States will also be visiting South Africa almost at the same time with Sergey Lavrov. That is, their presence will be almost together, almost at the same time in Africa. So it is, as you say, a scramble for appointments with African countries to meet with these people for obvious reasons. One is that Africa is key when it comes to voting, particularly multilateral platforms, including the United Nations. Africa has got a muscle in terms of the number of countries that has got the voting rights. And we've seen how important it was when South Africa abstained and other countries in Africa decided to vote in favor of that resolution condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So Africa, notwithstanding, it's important when it comes to multilateral platforms. But importantly, Africa has got vast natural resources, as I've said. And that scramble is going to start in earnest. China will try very hard to resuscitate its economy after 3 years of devastating coronavirus. So they would like to open up their economy with a bang by going on a charm offensive in Africa and making sure that the business continues, the business that was stalled by COVID-19. So all of these countries, three of them, are trying to resuscitate their relationship with Africa by using all sorts of, luring Africa into all sorts of contracts moving forward. Yeah.
Is Africa itself divided on their position when it comes to Russia? For example, in those voting blocks, you will remember South Africa abstained, but I think it was Kenya that voted against Russia. But is that a common thing in Africa, that we would be divided on this position, and does it indicate anything?
Yes, Africa is divided, and we've seen not only in the case of Russia, but in the case of Russia, of course, we had a clear division in terms of Africa's positions. South Africa and other countries deciding to take a position of abstaining from taking a position, but there are a lot of other countries in Africa that voted in favor and others voted against. So Africa is divided in this regard. But this was not the first time. We know, for example, that Africa is also divided when it comes to the inclusion of Israel, for example, the observer status of Israel at the African Union, which was brought in through the back door. Many African countries, including South Africa and Algeria, opposed that move of granting Israel the observer status within the African Union Commission. But you had a number of African countries who supported that move by the chairperson of the African Union Commission, Fakude Mohammed. So these are positions that Africa has taken over the years, and I think they'll continue taking divisive positions because of the nature in which this war and the gravity that this war is created in Ukraine.
So Russia coming to South Africa, of course, also in the context of the BRICS alignment. There are a number of other countries now that want to join BRICS. I think Saudi Arabia, I think Morocco would be those that are coming to mind. What does that mean about this particular alignment?
Well, the BRICS is expanding, but of course one is concerned about the track record of these countries that are wishing to join BRICS, countries such as Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Iran. These are all countries with really troubling or concerning human rights record. You know what's going on in those countries at the moment. Egypt has got thousands of journalists and activists who are currently jailed. Saudi Arabia is known for its killing of journalists, including the murder and chopping of Jamal Khashoggi in 2018 in Istanbul. Iran continues to suppress basic freedom. So all of these countries that are coming in are worrisome. But besides those countries, I mean, the current membership of BRICS save Brazil, that has just elected its new president. But before Lula da Silva, you had Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, who was also pro-Matic. You've got Prime Minister Modi of India, who's accused of oppressing and killing the Muslims, minority Muslims in India. China and Xi Jinping is accused of all sorts of oppression, particularly of the minority Muslims in Xinjiang. Now you have the likes of Vladimir Putin also forming part of this bloc. So South Africa is by and large the only country that has got a semblance of respect of democracy and basic individual freedoms, whilst those that are going to be joining or have indicated that they will be joining BRICS and the current membership have got a really, really concerning track record when it comes to freedoms and individual rights.
Yeah. The military exercises, Minister Pandor saying that, well, I don't know why people are complaining. They never asked when the U.S. was here. We conducted a military exercise just last year in November. France was here. Military exercise was conducted. Why is it that we are asking now? Because it's Russia. The military exercises themselves, how important are they, and why would we want to participate in them as capacity building? But, of course, they also have other political implications, I suppose.
Well, one wonders why we have to go through these military exercises. We have not been doing that in the past. South Africa is certainly punching way above its weight, trying to show off its military and particularly marine military war arsenal, which for me, I think it's a bit problematic. I'm not quite sure whether we want to join the club that decides who lives and dies. And I think one of the carrot that was dangled today to Minister Pandor was that Russia was willing to support the South African position when it comes to the reform of the United Nations. And you know what that meant? It meant that South Africa wants to become part of the UN Security Council permanent member, thus joining the group of countries that decides who lives and who dies. So I'm not quite sure whether it's a wise thing to do, but I understand that South Africa wants to be recognized as one of the power houses around the world, and it's about time that it's beginning to show what it has. But this is definitely likely to come back to haunt us, because big powers come with certain responsibilities. We have already started showing that responsibility in Mozambique, and I'm not quite sure how well we're doing there, but reports that we're getting is that we're not doing that well, because the insurgents in Mozambique are digging in their hills together with the competing power, which is Rwanda. So I think it's all about South Africa showing off its muscle and continuing to punch way above its weight, but I'm not quite sure whether it's a good idea.
Yeah, I wanted to say, do we have power to show off?
Well, I think we have power, and we have the military muscle in terms of weaponry, but I'm not quite sure whether it's the right thing to do. We still have a very strong diplomatic arsenal, which we inherited from our forefathers, including Nelson Mandela. We are respected because we're a country that pushes forward a diplomatic solutions instead of military solutions. And here we are now showing the world that over and above the capital that we have in terms of our diplomatic capabilities and know-how, we also have military power. And that's actually troubling because it will begin to send a new and a different message to the world about what are we capable of, and that's likely to overshadow the capability which I've already said, which has been the diplomatic capability that we are all known for throughout the world.
Military power we might have, but power to power our economy is something certainly that we do not have currently, right in the midst of an energy crisis. Could Russia be the solution? Can they, in the next 6 months, send a power ship over the side, just we can plug and give us a little bit more megawatts?
Well, I think Russia could be able, well, notwithstanding the sanctions, of course, but they could be able to somehow smuggle the cheap oil into African energy, but that would be very difficult given that there is that will be watched closely by the countries that have imposed sanctions on Russia. I think we're going to go ahead with soliciting and contracting some of the services from Turkey. Russia has already failed, if you remember, the nuclear deal that led to the demise of the former president, Jacob Zuma. It was from Russia, and that collapsed, and I'm not quite sure whether President Cyril Ramaphosa and his cabinet will resuscitate that relationship. So we're moving ahead with alternative clean energy, and I think those capabilities are going to be sourced from other countries, not necessarily Russia. So Russia will continue playing a role somehow, particularly on BRICS, by putting pressure on South Africa through inviting additional members into BRICS, and by so doing, I think Russians will hope that South Africa will succumb to the pressure and begin to listen to Vladimir Putin's, desires in terms of how he sees the world. But moving forward, I don't think Russia will be able to come to our assistance in terms of elevating the current challenges we're facing on power supply.
Thembisa Fakude, as always, appreciate your time, sir. Thank you very much for coming on. Senior Research Fellow and Director with the Africa-Asia Dialogue.